This is Crappy to Happy, and I am your host, Cass Dunn. I'm a clinical and coaching psychologist, a mindfulness meditation teacher, and of course, author of the Crappy to Happy books. In this show, I bring you conversations with interesting, inspiring, intelligent people who are experts in their field and who have something of value to share that will help you feel less crappy and more happy. Before we get into today's episode, I want to tell you about two quick things. The first is that on the 23rd of July, I am having a free online workshop all about how to cultivate self-confidence. So overcoming imposter syndrome, self-doubt, cultivating self-confidence from the inside that is not attached to your external achievements and outcomes. It is live on Zoom. You can register on my website. Just go to cassdunn.com and the top of the page you will see the button to press to register. So don't miss out on that one. Secondly, if you would like to send me a voicemail, you can now also go to my website, cassdunn.com/podcast, and you will see there that you can press a button, send me a voice note. If there is any topic you want me to cover on the show, if you just want to share your feedback, please head to my website, send me a voicemail. I would love to hear from you. Now, let's get to talking about today's guest. Ariane Beeston was a child protection worker, and she was a newly registered psychologist working for the Department of Communities and Justice in New South Wales when she gave birth to her first baby, a little boy, and quickly began to experience scary breaks with reality. She was later diagnosed with severe postpartum depression with psychotic features. She has documented her experience in her brand new memoir, which is called Because I'm Not Myself, You See. It is so candid, it is hilariously funny also at times, and it tells the story, and what she and I shared in our conversation is the pressure that is put on new mothers and how quickly things can go terribly wrong, and how much stigma and shame there still exists in this space, and how many women can be really reluctant to come forward and to speak up about their experiences. Ariane is now the Communications and Content Manager for the Centre of Perinatal Excellence, otherwise known as COPE. She's also a dancer, she's a choreographer, she's a writer, obviously, and she is just a delightful human being. If there is anybody in your life who is a mother, wants to be a mother, or been in the remote vicinity of a mother, then this is an absolute must listen. Ariane, welcome to the Crappy to Happy podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
I have devoured your book. It is called Because I'm Not Myself, You See, which honestly, gold star for the title of the book.
I'm so glad you like it. I was so attached to it. I would have been devastated if my publisher said we had to change it. I would have fought for it.
It is perfect. It is perfect. And I just wanted to say also personally, before we even dive into your experience and the book, Perinatal Mental Health, which is what we're here to talk about, I could just personally relate so much to your experience. I came out of an undergrad degree in psychology. I worked in child protection. I was taking kids from their families, age 22. I mean, that is insanity in hindsight.
Yes. Wow, so a lot of similarities.
Yeah. Wanted to always write. Have now written books, like not a memoir, obviously, but I've written as well. And then I went on to do my clinical psychology degree, but after I had my daughter and I had my own postnatal depression, which I didn't actually admit at the time or didn't realize at the time, like only in hindsight was like, well, I was pretty fucked up. So you don't realize it at the time, I don't think, for various reasons, or aren't willing to acknowledge it. So much. I was reading your book thinking, oh my God, like
that's so exciting.
I knew exactly what you were experiencing, to the point that I had to put it down and walk away sometimes, because it was just a little bit like, oh God, it took me
back.
It took
into
me
that
back.
Space, yeah.
You have written it so beautifully, and I think that's the beauty. I think many women and mothers in particular, and I speak to a lot of them, will be able to see themselves in your story, and that is lovely for them. So
that means a lot that you say that, because I think a few people have sort of said, I wasn't sure if I would be able to relate to the book because your experience was so sort of extreme, on the extreme end of the spectrum, but there's so much in there, isn't it, that people can actually relate to just from that transition to motherhood. So that's been really lovely to get that feedback.
Yeah. And so obviously, up front, you experienced postnatal psychosis, which we will get to, that affects a very small number of women. But anybody who has had postnatal or perinatal depression or anxiety, it's all in there, right? Even you talking about the nappy rash and the not feeding and the not sleeping. I was like, oh my God, I remember that.
And that's the thing. I think even if you haven't had perinatal anxiety or depression, women will still see themselves in, that moment after birth, for instance. And if you don't necessarily feel that rush of love at first sight, or that first drive home from hospital when you drive slowly because you've got precious cargo in the back, or the first time you try to put up the pram and you realize that you actually need a higher IQ to, to put up the pram that you've bought, and you have big regrets. So I think, yeah, there's those moments and sort of things that I think a lot of people can relate to, even if it's not the perinatal anxiety and depression.
100%. It's so personal, but it's so universal. The getting home from the hospital and just looking at each other going, what do we do now?
What now?
What now? What next? I don't.
Yeah.
What is this new life and this new world? It's so relatable.
Do we play with it? Do we talk to it? Like, what does it do? Absolutely. And it is such a universal experience, some of those key points in each of our journeys.
So, Ariane, we romanticize motherhood. Anybody who wants to have a baby and who is in the very, very fortunate position of being able to have a baby looks forward to this momentous occasion. It's with so much anticipation. We're so excited. It's going to be so wonderful. And the truth of the matter is that for many women, it is not. And you've outlined that really well. I know that from my own lived experience. After I had my baby, I felt this kind of deep desire to want to warn other women and other mothers about my experience. From your experience and the work that you do now, how do we find the balance between effectively preparing women for what the reality is going to be without going down that path of scaring them, or, we don't want to be negative about it, but
yeah. I love that question, and I love that you've asked that question, because I think, is so much of the work that we do and that I'm doing now with COPE is about preparing and doing that sort of preventative work before you have the baby. And it's not, like you said, I think, and I do talk about this in the book as well, it's about not wanting to scare people or to kind of put this really negative lens on motherhood. But to prepare you. And so some of the things that we've worked on is so we've got an app, a Ready to Cope app, which actually sort of drip feeds information through pregnancy and postpartum, sort of timed to where you're at. And it really does sort of touch on some of those things like the impact of sleep deprivation or the changes to your relationship, and how that can come as such a shock. And, what happens if your birth doesn't go to plan, and how to respond to differences in the way that you've been parented and how you'll manage some of those decisions. And sort of really just sort of gently introducing those topics, and then also talking about the risks of experiencing a perinatal mental illness, talking about what the risk factors are and whether you might be at higher risk, whether your partner might be at higher risk. But I think what you said, and I was thinking about reflecting on that just now, there's almost, you do want to give people the information and make sure that they're prepared. There's also a real innocence too about pregnancy and that bubble, and sort of, and you want people to have that. You want people to be able to enjoy the innocence of their first pregnancy, and because you know that it's tough, and you know that on the other side there will be challenges. And so I like also just to be there. Be the safety net, be there when those challenges happen, because, inevitably it's much harder than people expect. Having those conversations, but being there when it's hard, and not being like, I told you so, or, this is what I warned you, not being negative, but just going, yeah, it is really, really hard, and I'm here for you because I know what it's like, and that empathy.
So true, because I think that's what we all need. When did you realize that something was really wrong after you had your baby?
I think there's just 2 points to that, because I know now retrospectively that the first psychotic symptoms would have been about 4 days postpartum, and that was around the nappy rash. So a little bit of context around that was, we mentioned both working in child protection, and I had worked in frontline and with families, and had taken children into care. And there was a particular case where a baby had a bit of a nappy rash. And for whatever reason, that sort of settled somewhere in my brain, as these cases have, can do, as you would know. Um, and when 4 days postpartum, he had a bit of a nappy rash that sort of triggered these delusional thoughts that the department or that child protection were going to come and take him. And so I became convinced that child protection were going to come and remove him on account of this tiny, very normal nappy rash. And then, began experiencing other symptoms, hallucinations. So I thought that I had died and had this strong sense of being dead and not existing, and then being stuck on this loop of thought that if I was dead already, then if I then took my own life, that it wouldn't matter because I'd never existed anyway. But even then, I mean, these were obviously very distressing and strange thoughts and experiences, but it really wasn't until I was probably about 6 months postpartum where, it was really obvious to everyone else around me physically that I wasn't well. And that sort of then prompted me actually going and seeking help. But it was much sort of further down the track than it should have been. It really went undetected for a long time.
Yeah. Even though what you experienced, like we said in the beginning, was quite extreme, like the rate of women who experience postnatal psychosis is very rare, but many more women will experience depression, anxiety, but I think would have a similar story of it going undetected for a really long time.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
why is that? Why do so many women kind of fall through the cracks?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. I think there's still a lot of stigma around maternal mental illness, and we have that myth of the wanting to be the perfect mother and that bliss and joy, and so anything less than that makes a lot of women feel like they're failing, and I think social media doesn't help with that either. And so I think people see, or a lot of women see, needing to seek help as a failure, as a personal failing. I think you look around, and often you go to a mother's group and you look around and everyone else seems to be coping, and oftentimes they're all struggling as well, but everyone's putting on a face. It for a lot of women there is just that sense of shame and stigma and not wanting to feel that they've failed as a mother. And that's something it makes me very sad to think that women would be suffering in silence for fear of being judged.
Same. And I agree. I completely agree. There is this sense of shame. And I think you're right. We see what we think is everybody else coping. Everybody else is doing it okay. And it's just me. So I don't want to admit that there's a problem. I actually, as you were talking then, was remembering that when I spoke to my GP, I think I was in tears yet again in the GP office, and her suggesting
relatable.
and her suggesting to me very gently that she thought that I might have postnatal depression, and me saying, "Oh, no, I'm fine. I'm just having a bad day. Like my husband's away this week.
Yeah.
So, or the baby didn't sleep last night.
Tired.
She never fucking slept. I'm just tired."
No.
I always had a reason, why this was not an issue. It was just I was just having a bad day. And, it wasn't until years later when I was actually training in perinatal mental health, because interestingly, that's where I chose to go and focus my clinical work after I got registered.
Yeah.
It was, I learned for the first time that this is characteristic of postnatal depression, this up and down of the mood, and there's good days and bad days, which I hadn't realized at the time. I just thought I was generally having a bad day. So I tell women that all the time now. The up and down nature of it is the illness.
Exactly. And I think also as well, you manage to kind of draw together you go into survival mode, and because you basically you're having to look after this little person and to meet their needs. So you do seem to be able to pull together your resources and keep going. And that can also make it feel like, there are days when you're feeling not too bad and then other days when you're just miserable. And people think, well, maybe I can't be depressed if, I'm still able to function to a degree. But yeah, as we know, it's very sad.
Yeah, it is. It is. And you know what else? I was reminded so much of all of this when I was reading your book. It's the people around you too who can be quite dismissive. Even if you say, like, I'm really struggling, oh, it'll pass. Oh, this time is short.
That's
Or
just part of having a baby.
that's part of
That's
having,
just how it is. Yeah, it's just how it
lucky they're
is.
cute, isn't it? Lucky they're cute. I mean, I was dying and people didn't seem to get it. So this is why I think it is so important, the work that you're doing now and in the book that you've written, like it is so important for people to understand it, to actually listen and maybe ask more questions or maybe.
And I think too, what you said before, I mean, it takes so much to actually be honest. So if someone has actually, brought themselves to the point where they've said, "Oh, I'm struggling, or I'm feeling a bit anxious," and then to be completely dismissed or to be shut down, because it takes so much sometimes, doesn't it, to actually start to open up. And then you think, well, they tried and I felt ignored or belittled, or why would you bother asking for help again? So yeah, I think we do really need to be really, really mindful of the language that we're using and how we're responding to new parents in our lives, because yeah, the act of actually asking for help or admitting that you're
Admitting
struggling.
that you're struggling, exactly. It's huge. Ariane, we mentioned before about the feelings of shame and feeling like a failure when, well, everybody has a baby and everybody else seems to be coping fine. How was that exacerbated by the fact that you were a psychologist? And I asked this question as a psychologist myself, but I wasn't registered at the time I had my baby. But there are many psychologists who listen to this podcast as well.
Yes.
So I think those of us with professional training can feel extra shame and extra pressure to have it together because of our professional training. Was that your experience?
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely. So that was definitely one of the big barriers in terms of, seeking help. So, I talked about the stigma of being a mum with a mental illness, but then you add the stigma of being a mental health professional with a mental illness. And yeah, that was just, like you said, another complete layer of shame. I was newly registered, and I was really concerned that if I am too honest about, how bad things are, that they might take away my registration, my ability to practice. What will my colleagues think of me? What would this mean? Yeah, for my work and my career. And so, yeah, that really meant that I, suffered a lot longer than I wish I had. But also then being admitted to hospital, being on the other side of the sort of the whole experience, and being the one who was being assessed and observed was really humbling. It was really tough. And again, it just felt to me like absolute rock bottom that I had ended up there. But I think as well, there was also the challenge of I knew the language, I knew what to say, what not to say, what not to reveal, and I knew what to circle on the measures. So I wasn't, completely honest, I think, about exactly how bad things were, because I knew what I was doing.
Yeah.
So yeah, it definitely was tough.
Yeah, you talk about being admitted voluntarily initially to the mother and baby unit. So your baby was how old? About 8 months?
Yeah, 8 or 9 months postpartum. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And I would love for you to share your experience. I mean, I'm laughing about it. Your experience. I was
I know what you're going to
giggling.
say, without therapy. Oh man, I'm
I was
sorry.
laughing.
I did not want to do so. When they sort of said, "Oh, you need to come into hospital," and I was so reluctant. But the thing of all things, the thing that I was most concerned about was that they were going to make me do art therapy, to the point that one of the chapters in my book I ended up calling, if they make me do art therapy. Um, but yeah, I don't know what it was about. Yeah, but I was absolutely, no one was going to make me pick up, glues and pens and paintbrushes. There's no way. And yeah, of course they did make me do art therapy, and in the end, I didn't mind it. It was actually it was quite therapeutic.
Lo and
So
behold.
yeah, yeah. The system works. But no, I was I was a very difficult patient. And yes, I really did not want to color in or do any painting or I was very, where's the evidence base for this? This is just, what do you mean?
I know.
So,
It was so funny. Taking a screenshot of like the art therapy schedule on the wall to send to your husband. They're going to make me do fucking art therapy.
Every fucking day. And he's like, this is the times that the art therapy room is open and available for use. It's not the times that you're expected to be doing art therapy. and I'm like, oh gosh. Okay, well still.
In hindsight, Ariane, like in hindsight, as much as you were a difficult patient and, you didn't want to do the things and you broke all the rules, what was good about that experience for women listening who might be thinking, would it be helpful? Like what was good about that for you?
Oh, look, I'm such a huge advocate for mother-baby units. I think they save lives and they are crucial for, that attachment and bonding. And we know that it's best practice if you can be admitted with your baby for treatment. Obviously, here in Australia, there aren't enough of them, but certainly compared to the rest of the world, we're doing not too badly on that front. Can always do better. No, I think what's so great about them is it provides this sort of bubble from the world in a way. So you go in and you've got access to, psychiatrists, psychologists, social workers. You do group therapy, which is really beneficial. A lot of women find that doing those CBT strategies and mindfulness, learning about some of the myths of motherhood and kind of talking about your lived experience and listening to other people's experience and being with other people who are going through something similar is a really powerful part of recovery for a lot of women. And just having that, that break from a little bit of sort of protection from the world. You're in there, you obviously you don't have to cook and clean. And so, which is, a huge kind of, respite. When you're really, really struggling, there are people there to help with the mothercraft skills, so helping you with breastfeeding and sleeping and settling if you've got a really young bub, or even if you've got an older bub and you've had challenges with sleep. So I think it's just a really good opportunity, again, to get medication and get that sorted. A lot of women go in and that's something that you can really work out what the best combination of meds are, and in a safe environment where you're able to work through some of those side effects or taper off one medication to come onto something else under supervision rather than doing it out in the community by yourself. Yeah, so no, I'm such a huge advocate for these MBUs, and I think part of why I wanted to write the book, and obviously I do joke about, and I was a terrible patient, but it was to kind of demystify what it's like to be on a psychiatric ward. And I think so many of us grew up sort of watching Girl Interrupted or those Jack Nicholson movie. And it's not, it's not like that at all. And they're really quite wonderful places for women who need that help and support. So yeah, big advocate, big supporter of parent, infant, and mother baby. And even art therapy, even in the end, even I was even doing my collage. I did my collage, and I was very, very proud of my psychiatric ward masterpiece.
You just mentioned medication then. When I went to work in private practice, and a big part of my caseload was women during the perinatal period, either postnatally or some of them pregnant, had a history of anxiety and depression. And some of them actually ended up coming back to me like for their second pregnant, like after I'd seen them with their first, they came back for their second. And for many women, there was this strong reluctance to take medication for fear of what it might do to the baby, for fear of getting hooked on it, not being able to come off it. I would love to hear what your experience was with medication. And I would start by saying that for many of the women who I worked with who eventually decided to go down that path, the most common thing I heard from them was, I wish that I had started
I wish I'd done it sooner. Yeah, I wish I'd done it earlier.
I wish I had known that I didn't have to struggle for so long, like why I had forced myself to struggle and make it harder than it needed to be for such a long time. So But medication has different effects on different people. Like some people don't respond to every medication. So I'd love to hear your experience of that, of working through.
Yeah, those challenges. So yeah, I mean, it took me. So most people are initially prescribed an SSRI. It seems that as a primary first line treatment. So I started on I think it was Zola, and yeah, I really just didn't. It didn't respond to it particularly well. I had some quite severe side effects, a lot of agitation, and just yeah, nausea and yeah, and it just didn't really seem to be doing much at all. And then in hospital, tapered off that and had some really severe side effects, withdrawing from it. So really, sort of brain shocks and that I would feel through my whole body. And so tapering from the medication was quite distressing. And then again, tried a different type of antidepressant that had a really sedating effect. So it made me very drowsy, which meant that I couldn't really get up overnight to attend to the baby. And so that again wasn't one that I could take long term. Came off that one. I tried another SSRI, which seemed to have a much cleaner side effect profile. And then eventually added a mood stabilizer and small dose of an antipsychotic as well, mainly for sleep at that point. But yeah, getting that mix right definitely took some time and perseverance and, tapering up, tapering down. Yeah, it was really challenging and really distressing because I mean, as you would know from your own practice, everybody sort of responds differently, as you said earlier.
Yeah.
And it's not a simple, it's very difficult. It's more of an art.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's just so important for people to know that. And interestingly, as you're talking, I'm remembering that because it's been quite a while since I was, doing private practice in Brisbane. And I remember having a series of women, like over time, who were all having a similar response to one particular medication. I can't remember what it was. Maybe it was Zoloft and it made them gave them insomnia, or it made them sleep. I think it was insomnia. And it was interesting for me as a psychologist who is not a doctor. I don't prescribe medication, but to hear from multiple different women having the same experience, that I could then say to my client, oh, that's actually quite common. Go back and get that reviewed. And for them, just the relief of knowing,
it's not just me.
It's not just me.
And there are other options as well.
Yeah.
There are other options. Yeah. So if one medication doesn't work for you, or you do have side effects that are intolerable, that's not the end of the road. There are other options, and that you can continue to find the right sort of dose. And it can be really comforting to hear that.
Yeah. And it felt like, it felt like, apart from any therapy work, just being in a position to be able to say to women, oh, you're not alone in this. Like this happens to, like, I've had this many other clients who've had the same experience. Yes. There is just something so reassuring about that. And I think that's one really nice thing about having a therapist who works in this space. I mean, you would know this as well. Like,
so important. Yeah, that perinatal expertise. And I always say that to people: if you're looking for a clinician, you really, if you can, someone who's got that training and that specific expertise in the perinatal space. As you would know, it's so important.
I had many client come to me, and the first question they asked me was, do you have children, or have you had a baby? Because I've been to, and I would say, well, yeah, I do. And I had my own struggles, because I've been to another psychologist who didn't have children, and they just didn't get it. Like, for all of their clinical training and for all of their, best intentions, you don't get it unless you've had a baby. And I actually 100% agree with that.
I do too. And it's interesting. I mean, in the book, I talk a little bit about going to a psychiatrist initially, who was just completely the wrong fit for me at that time. Again, very good clinician, highly recommended. But I think it was just, I don't want to sit, like I was newly postpartum. And it was that similar thing of, you might have kids, but you've never been a mother, you've never breastfed, you've never given birth. And it was for that, at whatever point at that moment in my life, I did not want him to be the one I did not feel like he was the one who was going to be able to help me at that point. And I think that's actually not uncommon. We do often seek someone who has been through, even if it's not the lived experience of a perinatal illness, but just the experience of parenting, being a mom and understanding that can be really important for a lot of women.
Yeah. You speak very fondly about your psychiatrist who you eventually came to form a relationship with, who you still see today, I
I
understand.
do. Yes. Yeah. 12 years later, we're still together.
I love that.
I always joke about that. Perhaps she's the second longest relationship of my life after my marriage.
I love that.
She's the best.
And she was so foundational, it sounds like, to your recovery and through helping you to navigate all of the various things that you tried and that you did and what worked and what didn't work for you.
Mm.
In hindsight, what was it that you really needed? Like, what was the difference that kind of made the difference to you?
What was it about her that kind of really,
Yeah, what was it
did
about
she
her?
do? I think it's a good question because I didn't warm to her straight away. And we laugh about that now, that she really had to work to sort of build my trust. And I think she realized that, I was reluctant to be in the room, and I was reluctant to do any kind of like a therapeutic work. I just wanted to get better. I just wanted the medication by that point and her sign off so that I could go back to work and get on with my life. This is after I'd been released from hospital. And I think what she did was she sort of met me halfway. She didn't completely sort of enable me just to, yep, here are your medication, off you go, you'll be fine. But she also didn't sort of say, no, you can't go back to work. No, you need to do this. You need to, yeah. So she sort of met me halfway. And at that point it was, okay, you want to come off medication? Let's try that and we'll see how you go. And you want to go back to work? Okay, let's go back to work. You can go back to work a couple of days a week, no clinical work. Again, we'll just see how you go. And we've since laughed about the fact that she knew that in both occasions that I did need to go back on medication, and that going back to work was not the right thing for me at that time. But I needed to do that myself, and I needed to experience that, and then to be able to come back to her and go, okay, you were right. I get it now, and let's get me better. And I, can put that trust in you that you know what you're doing. But yeah, I think you do need to. I mean, so much of the work that, you do as well is about building that rapport, building that relationship, building that trust, so that women feel that they are able to come in and be completely authentic with you and be their true self. And that takes time and it takes skill. And yeah, I was very lucky that she was able to sort of sit with me in that pain and sit in the uncertainty of not knowing how long it would take to feel better and to get well. And yeah, that I felt she knew exactly what she was doing, and she was very special. Very special.
Yeah. I mean, I guess I'm hearing you say that she was really respectful of you and that she empowered you, to feel like, to give you a sense of agency.
Very much so. Yeah.
And also just that she held the space for you. And when I read that in your book, I thought, because there are many times during my work, and I haven't done that work for a few years now, but there were many times during my work that I really questioned whether I was having any positive impact, because I can't go into your house and get your baby to sleep. Like, I can't be there when you're at 4 a.m. But hearing you say that just being in that space, feeling held, like feeling like there was somewhere that you could just go and you could just be, I thought, oh, okay, so maybe I did. Maybe I did.
And that's beautiful. No, definitely. And I think that beautiful Karen Kleiman, her work around what it means to that holding women in distress and holding women in that perinatal period, and so much about it is that kind of we spend so much time holding the baby, and so being held in that space, and having someone sit with you and then not try and fix everything and rush in, because we know that that's, like you said, you're not there holding the baby at 4 a.m. You're not there in the house when everything's all over the place and you've got vomit on you. But it is that space, and literally holding that space for someone once a week or once a fortnight or whatever it is. And yeah, it does. It makes such a difference. It does. It really does. It's very powerful.
What really is striking is, how little support we offer to women when they become mothers. Like, it's just, oh, you have a baby and you come out and you take your maternity leave, and it is just not enough. And this is the work that you're doing now, right? Like there is so much work that we need to do as a society to better support women during the transition to motherhood.
Yes. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's really there's so much, like you said, it's almost like we set women up to fail in many ways, and that's around women being discharged from hospital very soon, and not feeling like they are supported to establish breastfeeding, not having that continuity of care throughout their pregnancy. And I had a really interesting discussion with a midwife the other day who was saying she feels that if women have that continuity of care, then by the time they get into that early postpartum period, they've established that relationship with the midwife. So if they're not feeling quite right, that relationship is there and they feel more confident about disclosing. Whereas if you're in a system where you're seeing different people at different appointments, and so you don't have that continuity, it can be much more difficult than if you are struggling at the other end to disclose to someone you've not spoken to before or a complete stranger. Um, so yeah, and I think also without paternity leave is often not enough. So your partner's going back to work often after only 1 or 2 weeks of leave.
Yeah.
And so yeah, you're sort of at home and you're still recovering and you're trying to work out how to be a mother, and you're on your own. And yeah, so many of us, these busy lives, and our parents are often still working, or they're not necessarily around to be as
Yeah.
hands-on as sometimes people expected. And yeah, you can feel really, really alone, and it's a
Very
really
alone.
difficult time, very isolating time.
Very. Oh, I just remember the first day that my husband went back to work. It's like when he walked out and shut the door.
Yeah,
Almost.
the door shuts, and
Now I'm on
my
my
God, now I'm on my own. It's just weird, and you also feel like that I was such a capable, competent person,
oh
and now I'm just completely incompetent. I don't know what I'm doing, and yeah, it's really tough. And for a lot of women who've worked and been professional and have children later, it's such a shock. It's like last week I was
it's
sitting in a boardroom, and today I'm at home and I'm crying because I can't get this little person to sleep. And yeah, it's a real a real shift that a lot of women
yeah,
really struggle with.
it is tough. It is tough. Ariane, there are certain factors that we know kind of will predispose women to
Mm.
potentially experiencing mood disorders, anxiety, postnatally. And I remember, like if you've had a mental illness in the past, like if you've been depressed in the past, you're more likely. If you've got no family support, you're more likely. I was really interested in your story. You're talking about the experience of the impact of being a dancer, of being a ballet dancer, and having issues around perfectionism and body image. I would love for you to talk a
Yeah,
little about that.
definitely. Yeah, it's been really interesting having released the book and how many people have been able to relate to that aspect. I spoke at a festival a couple of weeks ago, and when I was talking about that aspect, and I said something about, I knew the steps, I knew the choreography of motherhood, and I was able to perform it on command. And and then a woman came up and just said, "Oh my gosh, those words, I knew the steps too. I performed, I knew the steps." So I think for me, I wanted to be a ballerina, and so trained to quite an elite level through my teenage years. And yeah, I think the dream kind of died because I stopped growing. I was too short, and I'm 5'1", and to be a dancer, you sort of you often think about the very specific sort of body type, but also there's very specific sort of heights and aesthetic as well. And at that time, the preference was definitely for sort of longer, leaner dancers, and that just wasn't me. And so, yeah, as you can imagine, I wasn't the aesthetic ideal. I tried to be that, and had all kinds of, yeah, terrible body image and disordered eating to try and sort of bend myself and get myself into the shape that I thought I wanted or thought I should be. And yeah, once I stopped dancing, I sort of thought that part of my life was behind me. But it was actually being the experience of being pregnant and my body changing again, of being weighed. So weighed
Mm,
in the obstetrician's office, having those numbers recorded each week and watching the numbers go up. So for the first time, really, because I'd always been small and always, when I was unwell, it was always the opposite. So watching the numbers go up was very strange and quite distressing. And yeah, just that almost parallel, a lot of parallels between what it was like to be a young dancer and to have your body scrutinized and kind of prodded and commented on, and then being a pregnant woman. And again, society feels that that's the time where they're able to comment on the size of your bump or where you're carrying your weight or, and how you look. And suddenly, yeah, it's sort of acceptable to comment again. And so I found that those parallels really, really similar, and again, really struggled with the way that my body was changing and the different, or how I felt in my body. And I think the other interesting aspect of being a dancer, and that is, we know that perinatal mental health or illness is linked to perfectionism. And so if you're a perfectionist, then again, that's a risk factor for perinatal mental illness. And perfectionism and ballet sort of tend to go hand in hand. Ballet is all about perfection and seeking perfection and knowing that you'll never be perfect, but always striving for that, and knowing that you'll always fall short, but every day coming back and continuing to strive for that. And for so many of us who sort of have grown up or grew up training in that way, being a perfectionist and motherhood does not go hand in hand. It's why you can't. It just doesn't happen. And a lot of women really struggle with that if they've been perfectionists and having to really lower their standards and feel okay with that.
Yeah, exactly. And what you said before about I was competent and capable and I was in control, and suddenly you can't hold on to any of that anymore. And the other thing I thought you said that was so interesting about being a dancer was this practiced ability to paste on a smile regardless of what was going on the inside, performing.
Ability to perform. And everybody has said and still says, but you hit it so well. You hit it so well. We didn't know what was going on. And I was like, well, I knew the steps. I knew how to perform. I knew when I was in hospital, again, when we did the filming, they filmed an interaction with me and baby. And as you know, from your own practice, obviously that's often used as a way to sort of help women understand that growing attachment and the kinds of things that you can do to develop that. And I knew the steps.
Knew what to do.
The steps. I didn't. But that didn't mean that on the inside, or when I came off stage, or when the camera stopped filming, that I was crumbling. It's just that. Like with dance and the performance, the curtain closes and you don't see the dancers limping off stage and the blisters and the sweat and the torn calf muscles. You just see the beauty and the performance. Everything else is hidden. So it was interesting sort of exploring those different threads and seeing, I think, how it was like, yep, okay, that's another reason why, when I looked back over the story and those different aspects of my life and history, it sort of made a lot of sense.
Does it make sense? Makes sense.
Yeah.
And on the flip side of that, though, dancing was one of the things that ultimately kind of really saved you, brought you back to yourself.
Yeah, what it did, and going back to ballet and going back to dance was such a huge turning point, I think, in my recovery. But I think what changed was the perfection. And I think one aspect or one concept that I really learned to appreciate was that idea of being, good enough and a good enough mother. And going back to dance and going back to as an adult and as an adult teacher and teaching other adults, there's so much joy in imperfection and in rolling around in not being perfect, and just the joy of movement and not necessarily striving for perfection, just striving for that joy and the joy of movement and moving to music and expression and not needing to be perfect was something that was I know it sounds really silly, but it was such a kind of, it was a real turning point for me.
It actually doesn't sound silly at all. And what you just touched on then about Donald Winnicott and his theory of the good enough mother, it's so simple, but it's so profound and life-changing for many women. I quote him all the time as well.
Yes, all the time. Because it's such an easy not all of his concepts are easy to understand, but that's one of it is just so beautiful. And the fact that with motherhood and with parenthood, we teach we can't be perfect because the world isn't perfect. And so by not being perfect, we're helping our kids understand that, yeah, the world out there is not perfect as well. And so it's good not to be perfect. We're not supposed to be perfect because the world's not perfect. And it's lovely when people can sort of understand that there's beauty in imperfection and being human and responding in a human way and not perfect. And that's okay.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. In the book, you quote a really startling statistic that suicide is the third leading cause of death for women in the perinatal period.
Yeah, in Australia,
In
in Australia,
Australia.
I actually think in the UK, in the US and the UK, it actually may be the leading cause of death.
Wow.
Yeah, yeah.
And while that is shocking, what I found even more shocking was that they only count the postnatal period as being up to, is it 6 weeks postpartum? It's not even
It's
like it's
42 days.
not,
Yeah, 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 which is 6 weeks. Yeah, yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
it's not a year, it's not 2 years.
That actually really fascinated me. Yeah.
It is probably drastically underrepresented, right?
Yeah. And we know that from the research. So Hannah Darlin did some research around that and actually looked at those sort of later maternal deaths and did find that there was that peak period, I think at that sort of 6 to 9 month period, where, yeah, the services start to taper off and women are returning to work and there are a lot of other stressors. And yeah, a lot of those sort of early things that are in place, maternal child health, seeing your GP, mothers groups, that all starts to drop off. So, and that is definitely a risk point that we're not capturing. Yeah, that really, really fascinated me in the research that's not counted beyond that.
Yeah, I know. It's astonishing. And I just feel like that's a really difficult topic, but it's so important for people to have an understanding of that because I think we just sometimes will gloss over, even when we talk about the stats around postnatal depression, we kind of gloss over it. Like I don't know. I just feel like it just doesn't get enough attention and we don't realize necessarily the significance of it. And I have also read, I think this was back when I was in practice actually, that the
Mm.
peak period for diagnosis of postnatal depression is 4 years. Like there's a stat that it's 4 years after
Yeah,
birth.
there was actually a study. There was a study, Australian study on that, and yeah, that 4 years is the highest. Yeah, it was really interesting, really really interesting. I do remember that, and that yeah, it was it's an Australian research. So, and
So
I
this
think it
is,
is that if it's
yeah,
not addressed, if it's not picked up, then those symptoms can just continue and drag on, and women suffer for years.
and roll into the second pregnancy and,
Exactly.
etc.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I just feel like this is useful information for people to have. We just have this idea of this, like, oh, you have the baby blues, or for some women it drags on a little longer, but then you
Yeah.
come out the other side of it. Like it's only the first couple of months. This is all the stuff that I heard. Like, and it's not. It is
No.
not. And it is worth seeking help at any point. In fact, you went back into hospital when your baby
I
was
did.
almost 2,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, and at that point, because so they only take mother baby admissions up to 12 months. So again, that's that
Mm-hmm.
postpartum period at 12 months. That's it. So yeah, at that point, I was admitted by myself, and that was sort of I guess it was probably more. Yeah, perhaps a relapse, or I'd never actually properly fully recovered. But basically, yeah, I needed to have my medication reassessed. Again, I needed rest. I needed sleep. I just wasn't sleeping. And um, yeah, it was just, again, that sort of right. We need to look at the medication here in a situation where we can do that, where you're under supervision and, yeah, not in the community and having to manage that while mothering. And, yeah, so that was a shorter stay and a very different experience because it was a general psychiatric ward and
Mm,
definitely not as friendly and lovely as the mother
mm.
baby unit.
And you talk also about some of the shame that you felt around that, like your perception that people would be thinking, oh,
Yeah, so
what?
if she's, how old's her kid? Like, is she still sick? Why shouldn't she? I thought it was postpartum. Just like, why is she still? Yeah, and that was all my own stuff. I mean, I don't know. Obviously, I can't read people's minds, and I like to think people were more empathetic than that. But definitely, that was my fear that that people would just think, "Is what do you mean? She's still sick?"
Yeah.
um,
I think it's important to be honest about that, because what you're thinking is what other people are out there are thinking. You know, they're all having that same thoughts, and so that's why I think your book is so important, because it's normalizing so much of this. It's a universal. A
well,
lot
it's
of what
not a
you've talked about.
linear. It's
No.
not a linear recovery is not linear. For some people, recovery will be 2, 3, 4 stays in hospital, or it might be different medications, and it might be not going back to work for a while, or working part time, or working in a different capacity. It's just or sometimes it's like my friend who I met in hospital. For her, it was, I mean, it wasn't completely straightforward, but it was went into hospital, had the right meds, was discharged home, meds worked, went back to work, and it was sort of,
Good as
she
gold.
slowly was able to get on with her life. And not that it was an easy journey, but just that comparatively, it was sort of more straightforward and more what you would see, or what you would typically hope for. But that's not the case for a lot of us. And it can be really frustrating and demoralizing when you feel like you're just not getting better.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it can be really frustrating and demoralizing just to not just to be depressed after you've had a baby. I remember thinking, why did I get the dud baby who doesn't sleep? Like everybody else got a good one. Like,
That's
what's
right.
wrong with me? What's wrong with my baby?
Absolutely.
Not an uncommon.
There's a lot of why me?
Why me? Yeah.
Why not me? Why not me? So there is that too.
There's so much more that you talk about in your book, and I'm going to encourage everybody to go and get it. It is really beautifully written,
Thank you.
and researched as well. So it is your experience beautifully told, and also so much important information and stats and resources in there as well. But, you also talk about the decision of whether or not to have another baby, which is a really, really challenging, difficult thing, right? You're really honest about that, and you ultimately decided not to.
Yeah. For me, I did have that sort of peak again at that 4 years. I remember getting to, Henry was 4, and we started to think about it, starting to be mindful of that age gap. And having that sort of relapse, and it was a depressive episode, not psychotic. But it was enough for me to sort of think, I'm just not sure that I feel stable or feel ready or able to do it again. And there was certainly grief around that. And for a lot of women, it's a really difficult decision to make. But that was the right decision for me. And but no, I know.
I didn't have one either. I stopped at one. I stopped at 1 too.
Interesting. Yeah. Okay. That are so many similarities. So many
similarities. And the same thing. It's the same thing. Got to the point. Thought, no, I will. I'll have another one. And then it was just, I don't know. Do I risk it? And do I?
And that's the thing. It's a risk. It's a big risk, and you have to weigh out the risk and the benefits. And for me, I just thought that doing it would completely outstrip my capacity and resourcing. And for me, so in a way, it was quite a kind of clinical decision of, this would just not, like, it just doesn't, the math doesn't math. Like, it's just not going to, almost a bit stripped of emotion in a way, which.
Yeah, but it's still painful. And also there's the guilt and all of the pressure, and you should be giving them a sibling. And also I've missed out on I really wanted to have like a positive mothering experience. And I thought I would just like to have another one for many reasons, but for that as well. Now I'm going to get emotional about this.
It's a really big decision, and it's a really difficult, and something that a lot of women have also reached out after reading the book and just said, I did also just have one, and it's really difficult, and not everybody understands, and it's nice to feel validated that I've made the right choice.
Whether postnatal depression or not, right? Maybe you just want to have one baby, but there's so much the social pressure. Right?
Yes, and choosing to have one is so much more common these days.
Yeah, thankfully.
For lots and lots of reasons. So
thankfully,
so there's less stigma attached to it, I think, which is nice.
Ariane, and then you also talk about, the wider impact, like the impact, which we won't go into now because we're out of time, but, for people listening, the impact on your partner, like, because it's not, you're not the only one who, you obviously are the one who experiences this, but it does have ripple effects to the people in your family and your wider circle. I mean, it's important to acknowledge that as well, and for people to be checking
really
in on
look out
them
for
too.
them. Absolutely. That's definitely something that I hope is a real key takeaway from the book, that the partners and family, the carers who are having to step up into that role, they need to really be we need to be mindful that they're often struggling too, and their needs are kind of pushed aside because they're in this caring role often for their partner and their baby, while also managing work and financial pressures and all kinds of things. So watch out for the partners as well. They really need to be held to in their own way.
Yeah. Ariane, thank you so much for not only like dredging up all of your past and really painful experiences to share with us for such a positive benefit for readers. I really appreciate that. And for taking the time to do these interviews as well. And
it's my pleasure. It's my pleasure. And there's such a joy in having a conversation with someone who relates to so much of it. And I can tell that, you really resonated and really engaged so deeply with the book and the experience. So that it's such a pleasure. It's such an absolute pleasure to talk to you.
Well, I'm glad. Thank you so much, and good luck with it all. And I will put all of the links in the show notes to where to connect with you and to all the things that you're doing.
Yeah, all the cope resources, all the bits and pieces that we're working on. Be great for people to have access to those as well.
Of course.
Yeah.